Some of the challenges I faced in number 10 were really about handling the lobby, which is the daily meeting of the press, who are briefed by the Prime Minister's official spokesman. And the challenge is that balance, as always, between dealing with that day's news and thinking strategically, because in number 10, all the problems come to number 10, all the challenges come to number 10. So it's that balance between dealing with today's issues, but thinking about the longer term strategy.
I think the main challenges I faced at the Cabinet Office in number 10 was, I guess, the creation of the coalition government. And that was obviously something very new in the UK, and really just working out how that was going to work, how they were going to communicate between the parties, what kind of support should the civil service provide in making that run smoothly.
Well, within the coalition government, obviously this is new for British politics. We haven't seen coalition for many, many years. And I think generally the tone of communications has changed. I think one of the lessons of coalition is a less adversarial approach to communication. That's a positive thing. I think people know that actually in politics it's about compromise. And I think coalition has shown that compromise can work. So I think there are positive signs about a less Punch and Judy approach to communications.
I think the government handled the challenges of coalition quite well. The politicians, I think, have been very good at thinking about the requirements of their coalition partner, because it's everyone's interest for the coalition to be seen to be working. So there's quite a lot of thought that I saw into how parties could differentiate themselves and manage the kind of the lefts and rights of their parties respectively, but also promote the coalition as a kind of united kind of government for, to address the major problems that existed, particularly earlier on. I think for civil servants, it was an opportunity to put in place and make sure there were the kind of formal processes in place that civil servants like to have. We've all heard about the Safer Government, for example, and this was an opportunity to make sure these things are more kind of recorded and codified. I think people imagine, of course, that there would be some unique, and there of course are unique problems that need to be overcome. But I think those that, and I wasn't in government over the days of Blair and Brown, but those who were, I think felt that there was perhaps a feeling of coalition even in those days that the civil servants needed to kind of work with.
Well, all governments have to deal with controversial policies, and I do go back to Harold Macmillan and events, dear boys, events, because that is the nature of politics. And I think, again, it's this balance between tactics and strategy. And if a government or company, an organisation has a clear strategy, it's much easier to deal with the day-to-day problems and challenges that come up. And I think one of the other interesting things about politics is that what is a controversial story? Is it one that creates the headlines for a day? Is it 2 days? Does it dominate the news agenda for weeks and weeks? And I think context is really important, because when you're at the heart of government, as I was, you can quite easily lose touch with the fact that not everyone is obsessed by reading about politics every day.
One thing that I think the government did learn in the early days was the importance of pitch rolling and basically understanding before any reform was announced what the key stakeholders were likely to say about it, and then think about whether there was any small tweaks that could be made that could lessen any fallout of that.
Labour's challenge as an opposition party is how do you create the news? One of the interesting things again about being inside government is just understanding how big the machine is that supports you. And I think what the Labour Party has tried to do, as the Conservatives before them, is to create the agenda. And this opposition party is seeking to create the agenda through populist measures, whether it be on energy or, as we've seen today, banking. And I think that's the nature of opposition. You've got to create the news because the odds are stacked against you. Well, there were lots of highlights, and I have to say one of the things I found most fascinating was actually travelling with the Prime Minister. We went to Afghanistan 3 times on trips there, and to see that at first hand, to actually go into a place like Afghanistan and see what was happening on the ground and being alongside the Prime Minister was really extraordinary. So the kind of international part of it I found truly fascinating.
I think working in government is a huge privilege. Obviously, you get to have a ringside seat, really, at some of the most kind of important things affecting your society, and you get an insight in how decisions are made. And so it's hard to pick an individual one, and usually those individual ones are those you probably shouldn't talk about.